When you're changing a decimal to a fraction, you have to think about decimal place values. Remember decimal place values. After your decimal, you have the tenths place, then the 100ths place, then the 1000ths place, and then the 10,000ths place. That's important to remember as you change decimals to fractions. You need to know those place values. So let's look at our first decimal. We have 4/10. Well, just like it sounds, 4/10 can also be a fraction, 4/10. We put the 4 over its place value, which happens to be the tenths place. So to make it a fraction, it becomes 4 over 10, 4 in the tenths place. Then, as always, we have to simplify that fraction. And 2 goes into both 4 and 10, so 4/10 is equivalent to the fraction 2/5. Now, if we look at our next example, we have 15/100ths. So just like it sounds, 15/100ths, the 15 will go over its place value, which is the hundredths place. And if you notice, you can think of a 1 always being under the decimal, and then you have a 0 for each place that goes after the decimal. Since there were 2 numbers after the decimal, there are 2 zeros in that denominator. A 1 for the decimal, a 0 for each number after it. So that's 15 in the hundredths place, that's 15 over 100, and we have to simplify that fraction because there is a number that goes into both 15 and 100, and that would be 5. 5 goes into 15 3 times, and into 100 20 times. So our simplified fraction would be 3/20. Now looking at our next example, we have 2/1000ths. So if I put a line from my decimal to the end to make it to a fraction, I put a 1 under that decimal, then there are 3 numbers after the decimal, so that means there are 3 zeros in my denominator. 2 in the thousandths place, which makes it 2 over 1000. But again, that's not my final answer because 2 can go into both 2 and 1000. So that simplified answer would be 1/500th. Now our next example, we have a number before the decimal, 1 and 6/10. Well, any number that we have before the decimal is our whole number in our mixed number. Remember mixed numbers with a whole number and a fraction? This is a whole number and a decimal. Okay, so any number before the decimal goes before a fraction as a whole number. Then the number after the decimal goes over its place value. Under the decimal we put a 1. Each place after that decimal gets a 0. The 6 is in the tenths place, so that's 6/10. So we have 1 and 6/10, just like it sounded as a decimal, 1 and 6/10. But again, that's not my final answer because my fraction can be simplified by 2. So I just rewrite my whole number, and then my simplified fraction would be 3/5. So 1 and 6/10 is equivalent to the mixed number 1 and 3/5. Then on my final example, I have 2 and 5/100ths. So I put a line from my decimal to the end because that part is my fraction, right? The number before my decimal is my whole number. So that is my 2. Put a 1 under my decimal. Each place value after that gets a 0. There's 2 places after it, so 2 zeros. So that's 2 and 5/100ths. So just like it sounded, 2 and 5/100ths. But that's not my final answer because 5 goes into both 5 and 100. So I have to simplify that fraction. So I end up with 2 and 1/20 for my simplified answer.